happy Sabbath. Welcome to Douglasville Seventh-day Adventist Sabbath School. For those that are online and those that are in the sanctuary, we're glad to have you. It's starting to maybe feel a little less like summer. I'm going to knock on some wood because it's not quite as sweltering at the moment. I still have mushrooms growing in my yard. It's crazy that this late in the year it's so wet. And so let's bow our heads and have prayer. Dear Father, thank you for your love and watch care over us. Thank you for the ability to join and to review your word, because that's the thing that gives us life. You and your word and God in totality gives us life, gives us meaning, gives us everything we have. Help us to realize that and always to rely on you, and help us to learn more about you today and to apply it to our lives when we leave this place. In Jesus' name, amen. So, our Sabbath school lesson this week is about rest, relationships, and healing. And so we're still going into the Joseph theme and following through his stuff. But on Sabbath afternoon, it talks about a man had been accused of sexually assaulting a woman. This woman was convinced that he was guilty, and in the end, he did about 14 years in jail or prison, whatever you want to call it, and was convicted of molesting her. And then later, evidently, DNA evidence proved that he was not the perpetrator. And so the lady had actually really even wanted his death. Like, she wanted him to die. And then when she realized he was not the guilty party, she felt a lot of remorse and guilt. And so she wanted to meet him. And so in the meeting, he forgave her, which was very big of him. That's a God type of grace, because it was unmerited favor for somebody who had condemned him. She thought she was right, but she just was a little wrong. Yes, sir.
What always strikes me about...
Try the mic.
Yeah. What always strikes me about this, about cases like this, is that she picked this guy out of a lineup.
Yes.
I don't know.
So there's a lot of studies that talk about, back in the day when I worked in convenience stores,
Yeah.
I was an assistant manager at a Flying J's truck stop in Resaca, Georgia, years ago. And when the sheriff's department or the city, whoever came and interviewed us about somebody that had taken gas or stolen or done something, I'll just tell you, we're flawed. We think we know. I've been to a lineup and picked a person out of a lineup and ended up, they had a receipt that showed they were 2 states away.
Oh, really, Tim? Oh, man.
That's part of why in biblical times you had to have 2 or 3 witnesses.
Yes.
Yeah.
When I say there couldn't be any
Question.
disagreement, doubt. There couldn't be any hole in their stories that didn't line up.
Right.
Otherwise, you couldn't condemn someone, and that's important.
It is.
Of course, the premise in that is, which we kind of lost today, it is better for a guilty man to go free than an innocent man to be condemned.
So it seems, yeah.
God tended to put that into the rules that he gave Israel, and I think that it just goes to show his mercy also.
Yes, sir.
Something that amazes me, Anna and I were talking about this. It's one thing to have some minor incident happen between me and you, or let's just say that you cheated me out of $100, or you said something, or whatever, and we had a disagreement, we had a falling out over it, and then we told the person that we're sorry. And really, in the grand scheme of things, there was no real harm that came to a person. But like this individual here that spent a bunch of time in prison, or perhaps maybe somebody's drunk and they run into me. They don't kill me, but they paralyze me from the neck down.
Sure. Whoa.
They may come and say, I'm sorry, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life being able to do absolutely nothing. And that person's able to go free and do as they please. to me, that would be very difficult to
Sure.
forgive.
Well, you
Yeah.
look at these parents that have had children that have been murdered, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
we've heard repeated examples where the mothers which fathers, we're close to our kids, but moms have a very special connection with their kids. And so for a mother to forgive somebody for having murdered their child is not of this world. It's
No.
not natural.
Yeah,
it's
that's
not
right,
our
Tim.
it's not our
no.
human inclination.
Well, and
Right.
that comes down to, and you're absolutely right, but you put a comparison of $100, probably rightly so, it seems like it's no harm compared to years of suffering. Yes. But years of suffering is nothing compared to an eternity in heaven. So that's where it is only by the grace of God and the heart change to look at the reality of everything here is temporary. It's not the rest of our lives like we want to say it, because the rest of our lives are coming after, his return. It's a short speck. And when we put it in that perspective, it's like the $100 bill now. Mm-hmm. This life here is the $100 bill. It may seem like a long time while we're living it, but once this is done, it's going to seem really, really, really short.
And I 100% agree with you. However, it's easy when you're not dealing with any of it. You're just looking at something that
Yes.
happened to somebody else.
Right.
When
When
it's
it's
you,
changed your life,
it changes everything.
Yeah.
It's easy to say, well, hey, it's no big deal
Right.
in light of eternity. But let's say you're 18 years old and you get maimed for life.
Mm-hmm. Well, my history teacher was a enthusiast when I was in high school. Him and his brother, I knew his parents, Elder Dickman, and his mother went through nursing school with my mother. And so we were at Harvard Hills Academy, and he dove off into a swimming hole and paralyzed himself the rest of his life. He wasn't supposed to be at the swimming hole. They had snuck across a property line to get there. He was supposed to be, like, he had a obligation that evening, and he had skipped that obligation to go swimming. Now, him and his brother both ran a mowing business, and they mowed the big cell tower sites, or whatever they were, the repeating tower sites, and they mowed those all over western Tennessee. And they had completed a hard day's work, and they said, boy, it'd just be nice to get in there and swim. And he really felt like he was a very rebellious individual in a lot of ways, even though he was responsible and working, and he felt like it was the best thing that happened to him. Wow. And that's the part that I couldn't comprehend as somebody who loved sports and running and everything else, but he felt for his personality, for his spirituality, it was the best thing that ever happened to him. And yet we hear examples of this, and we're going to see that with Joseph, right?
Well,
we
I was
see
gonna
that
say
with
that's
Joseph.
exactly the story.
Yeah.
It is.
He wasn't paralyzed, but sold into slavery into a wicked land. No,
Isolated.
isolated, and absolutely no future
But
for
was
the
he
rest of
alone?
his life in his view.
Was he alone?
No, that's the point.
No, and
He
he
turned
and he
to
said he
what
made
he
a
had been
decision.
trained to, and he turned to God. His mother, his father, they had taught him about God, and he knew that was his only hope of salvation in that circumstance. His only possibility of help was God. He had nothing else. And
Yeah.
Ellen G. White says, in this circumstance, he matured years in days.
Well, he made the decision on the way over, traveling. This is it. I know from now on, I'm serving God fully. I'll trust Him. That's it.
So who else have we seen that made a similar decision in a similar circumstance? Shadrach, Meshach,
There
Abednego,
you go.
Daniel.
Yeah,
You know what I
Daniel,
mean?
right, yes,
All of these.
yeah.
They've hit this life-changing crisis, and they've made an intentional choice. I'm going to orient myself toward God. He is my salvation.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting? All of them were taken into captivity.
Mhm.
What about us?
We are captive
Yeah,
in sin.
yes.
And so when we look at, there's just a lot we could go here. I'm going to get off track. So let's keep going forward as we should be. So going to Sunday, well, before we get into this, so when we have been wronged, our natural inclination is to foster that feeling of woe is me, I was wronged, I'm the victim. And so there's a unique aspect of that you can look at a lot of the different, what's the guy that was a psychotherapist that was over in Nazi Germany. He was a Jewish guy that was in captivity, and he came out, and man, he's written books, and his insight into that situation. He was wronged more than most. Corrie ten Boom was wronged, right?
Oh boy, yeah.
I mean, you can just go through all these examples. That was very wrong what they went through. They were very wronged. They all had to make an intentional choice to forgive their captors, or what would have happened to them?
They would have just self-destructed.
They would have been stuck
Yeah.
and couldn't progress with their life. So the victimology is worse on the victim than on the person that caused the damage sometimes, okay? Can be very bad on both. But the thing that helps the victim is, and we're going to see that, his brothers were waiting for the other foot to fall. The condemnation, they felt guilt, they felt shame for what they had done to their younger brother. And
lying to their father.
And lying to their father, the
Yeah.
whole family. They had kind of cohesively devastated the rest of the family, or made a choice that really had a big impact on the rest of the family. And yet, when we're going through this, what keeps popping up in their minds? It's because of what we did to our brother. We're facing this. You know what I mean? And so they have that guilt, that shame, that remorse, that self-degradation, whatever you want to call it. And so you can look at, I cannot think of his name. Anyway, he's an awesome, his books are awesome. I mean, I'm telling you, it's crazy. He's got so much insight, the guy that was a psychotherapist that...
You gotta bring that name to us, Tim.
I cannot come up with it. But anyway, there's another guy that is at Harvard now. I'm not going to be able to come up with his name, but his book is called The Body Keeps the Score. And so he first was with the VA as he got out of school and was working with the Veterans Administration, and he worked with soldiers. And so he saw post-traumatic stress disorder, okay? Frequently, these people experienced, or they experienced wrong to them, or they experienced wrong from them giving it to somebody else. Like they had to follow their orders, and they were doing what they were told to do, but they wronged somebody. And in their personhood, that carried a score. Okay, in their body, in their soul, in their emotion, it carried a score. So he wanted to do research on PTSD, and they wouldn't allow him to because the VA's position back in the 70s was it didn't exist. So why would we study something? Why would we fund something that doesn't exist? But he saw that it did. So he goes to a Brigham and Young's Women's Hospital, which is part of the Harvard Circle of Hospitals, and he was working on the rape and abuse victims there. And he saw the same type of symptomology as PTSD that the soldiers had. But there's some commonalities. And so then he got into drug and alcohol and addiction and all of this kind of stuff. And what you find is, what he has found, and a lot of other data stacks up with this, is that if somebody is wronged in their youth by a superior, okay, could be a pastor, could be a parent, could be an uncle, an aunt, an adult of some variety, if they're wronged, they're like 7 times more likely to abuse substances, self-harm in some way, okay? Not that they're intentionally trying to suicide. Suicide is part of it, can be part of it, but they will frequently, it's almost like they're stuck in adolescence and they're partying and using this as a coping mechanism. Now, it can be anger. It doesn't have to be a drug or an alcohol or some outside substance. It can be a behavior. Some of them, like this one guy became a fighter, okay? And he was a very, very good fighter, and he kept putting himself in these increasingly uneven fights. He would fight bigger and bigger and bigger guys, you know? And he got more and more physical damage to himself over the years, but he had this internal rage that just he could overcome people much larger than him. And he just gave examples and examples of this. And the common theme was they were still victims. They were still holding on to that, and it caused an internal rage that minimized their growth as individuals.
But isn't this go back to almost the great controversy?
Sure.
It's the idea of the oppressor and the oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
Satan says that God's the oppressor and we're the oppressed. Does he not?
Yes, he does. But that's not accurate.
No, it's not accurate. But that same delusional lie, he reuses over and over and over again. Now he wants people to believe that we're all divided in everything in life in those categories, not just some things. And he wants us pitted against each other.
Right, right.
Because if I'm one or the other, then I'm either the
You're
cause.
stuck from
I'm either
growing.
the cause or I am a victim.
But you still have, just like Joseph and his
Yeah.
brothers, if Joseph had held on to his victimology, he would have been stunted. His brothers, they did the wrong, they're stunted. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
the crux of the story here with Joseph is that forgiveness trumps victimhood.
That's
It
right.
sure does. And
Got
just
it.
what you were saying.
That's where I'm getting
You
to.
you carry this stuff. Yeah.
So with Clock is his name. It's Dr. Clock, I think, is who did the Body Keeps the story. He said, well, okay, so I've studied 7 out of 10, and I see all these people. I want to study the 3 out of 10. How did they overcome this? And he started studying those. And they did studies for 20 years, okay? Like he studied both populations over 20 years in different settings with different fundings and everything. And he intentionally tried to study both. And what he found was the 3 out of 10 that progressed and didn't hang on to their victimology forgave. Their ability to forgive somebody allowed them to release that hurt, and they dealt with their emotions, which can be remarkably hard when you've been wronged to deal with this, to admit you're hurt. We're strong, in America, in other nations, there's kind of this pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You don't want to admit that you've been wronged. But anyway, if you can have some self-revelation and dig into your emotional hurt, then you can process that and get through it. But it takes an intentionality of choice. Now, we frequently attach victimology with emotions, okay? And we attach love with emotions. Both of those, our lesson points out, are not just emotions. They're an intentional choice to turn yourself away from the victimology or to turn yourself in love to somebody. It's a choice first. The emotions will typically follow the choice, but the choice comes first.
Well, getting back to the idea of that Satan lies and says God's the oppressor and we're the oppressed, the only answer to that lie was God had to become the ultimate victim.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, he could have the ultimate forgiveness.
Right.
Right?
And so let's go through this. So Jesus and Joseph, if we compare them, Joseph is a type of Jesus, okay? So if we're looking at Jesus and Joseph, both escaped death by fleeing to Egypt, right? They both escaped. Herod was going to kill Jesus. His brothers were considering killing Joseph, but then they opted to sell him. They both escaped by fleeing to Egypt. Both were betrayed by those closest to them. Jesus was betrayed by a disciple. Jesus was betrayed by a disciple. Joseph by his brothers. Both were unjustly condemned and convicted. Like his brothers kind of held court, threw him in the pit, and said, "You know what? You're going to go." And then later at Potiphar, he was really convicted. You know what I mean? And went to jail. Jesus was convicted in multiple courts and was condemned. Both suffered the consequences. So Jesus died. Joseph did not die. at that point. But he did suffer some pretty, like he was in jail for a while. He lost a status. He was Potiphar's right-hand man. He lost status. He lost everything. But here's the key. Both Christ first, Joseph a second, are some of the most powerful examples of forgiveness in the Bible.
And the one thing that they didn't lose, Tim, both Jesus and Joseph, and many of these other, Daniel, Shadrach, the other examples, they didn't lose focus.
On what?
On God himself.
That's right.
On who their God,
Their
who their
living
Savior was.
relationship. Yeah.
That's
Well,
right. Yeah.
And something that is easily overlooked with Joseph, he became the most powerful next to Pharaoh in all of Egypt.
Well, let me finish.
Well,
Both were exalted by God, right? Both were lifted up. Because they went through this thing, they were both exalted by God. Joseph to the right hand of Pharaoh, Christ to the right hand of God, right? And so there's a powerful thing with this. When we get to Judah, his brother, later in the lesson today, we're going to see Judah is who said, sell him. Sell him. He's not worth anything. Sell him for 20 pieces of silver. Sell him. Get rid of him. He's just a trouble. He rats us out on everything we're doing. Get rid of him. With Christ, Judas said, sell Christ for 30 pieces of silver. So you can say, well, maybe a little inflation, however many years between. But Judas had no value for Christ except for 30 pieces of silver. What Ellen G. White tells us is that when Christ talked about eating his body, drinking his blood, was the point that Judas saw Christ was only representing a spiritual kingdom. He realized then, there's nothing for me to glean here on an earthly realm, so what's the value? I got nothing in this. I don't care that much about a spiritual. He cared mostly about the earthly thing, and he sold Christ then. That's when he determined to get value out of it.
But I was going to say, though, when he was the most powerful, what prevented him from getting in his chariot and just leaving and going back home?
Yeah, he didn't. Yeah.
But what prevented it? What prevented that, I believe, is he had a connection with God that he realized through all this leading that he was exactly where God wanted him to be, and he didn't abandon that.
Right.
Because there was nothing when he was that powerful other than that moral compass that God gave him that kept him in Israel in Egypt doing that job of storing the grain for 7 years.
All right, so let's go to Genesis 42, and we're going to start in verse 7. Now, we know that Joseph was in power now. We've kind of come through that in the other lessons. He is in power. He saw the dreams, and he proposed the Pharaoh needs to promote a wise person, and his articulation of what would be a good plan so impressed all of them that they appointed him that wise person to implement the plan. They were like, nobody's wiser than him, and they were astounded at him. And so in verse 7 it says, and Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them, but made himself strange unto them, and spake roughly with them. And he said unto them, whence come ye? And they said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. So there's a few keys, and I'm going to skip around here, but live in 42, verse 7 on. He made himself strange to them. Why do you think he did that?
Well, I think he had a plan. He knew
plan.
who they were right away. He had a plan.
Right.
He wanted to see if they had changed.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
If anything had changed over the years.
Yes, absolutely.
I think also that he must have had mixed emotions at that point on, what God wanted him to do, what he wanted to feel. I mean, it says he went back, in the story, a couple times, and he wept and stuff like that. So,
Sure.
This, I'm not sure we understand what was going on completely in him, except for that he was doing what God foretold
Sure.
that he would do, and he followed God's leading.
Well, I'm going to get you an answer then. So I'm going to read something first. I forgot to read this on Sabbath. When one who professes to serve God wrongs or injures a brother, he misrepresents the character of God to that brother, and the wrong must be confessed. He must acknowledge it to be sin in order to be in harmony with God. Our brother may have done us a greater wrong than we have done him, but this does not lessen our responsibility to confess our sin to our brother. If when we come before God we remember that another has aught against us, we are to leave our gift of prayer, of thanksgiving, of free will offering, and go to the brother with whom we are at variance, and in humility confess our own sin and ask to be forgiven. If we have in any manner defrauded or injured our brother, we should make restitution. If we have unwittingly borne false witness, if we have misstated his words, if we have injured his influence in any way, we should go to the ones with whom we have conversed about him and take back all our injurious misstatements. If matters of difficulty between brethren were not laid open before others, but frankly spoken of between themselves in the spirit of Christian love, how much evil might be prevented? And she has an exclamation point there. And she doesn't use exclamation points a lot. Ellen G. White does not. How many roots of bitterness there whereby many are defiled would be destroyed, and how closely and tenderly might the followers of Christ be united in his love. And this is from Thoughts from the Mount of Blessing, page 58 and 59. And so on Sunday, when we're facing the past, is what it's talking about. It says, as Joseph saw his brother stooping and making obeisance, his dreams came to his mind. The scenes of the past rose vividly before him. His keen eye, surveying the group, discovered that Benjamin was not among them. Had he also fallen a victim to the treacherous cruelty of those savage men? He determined to learn the truth. He wished to learn if they possessed the same haughty spirit as when he was with them, and also to draw from them some more information as regard to their home. Yet he knew well how deceptive their statements might be. Patriarchs and Prophets 2:24 and 25. Yeah. And so when we look at...
Well, it kind of boils down to if he would have let them know right off the bat who he was, everything that they would have responded in would have most likely been out of fear.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
He was mining for honesty, wasn't he, huh?
He was
Right.
mining for honesty. He wanted to get a true statement of their character. And so as we go forward in the story, they confess. It's like they're had the truth serum almost. They're saying we're 10 brothers of one father. One is not, which isn't exactly truthful. But in their mind, he was not. They'd never seen or heard from him again, so he's gone. And then our youngest is with our father, and they divulge all of this, right? And when you look later in the text in Genesis, when they're talking to their father, he said, why would you tell all of this? And they give more details there. They say he asked about our family, and they gave, but in 42, when they're first saying it, it doesn't give those details. But if you go over to 43, when he's talking about not sending Jacob, they say, well, he asked us about our family, and we had to divulge. And so Joseph sends them to jail. He accuses them of being spies, and he just plops them in the jail for 3 days and nights. And Ellen G. White says in Patriarchs and Prophets 2:25, the 3 days in the Egyptian prison were days of bitter sorrow as Joseph's brothers reflected upon their past sins. And so they're getting the opportunity to grow spiritually like Joseph did. Okay? He grew spiritually at a much younger age in a pretty fast sequence of events.
Can't you imagine them in the jail saying, here, Dad sent us over here to get food so they wouldn't starve to death.
Right.
What's going to happen to him and Benjamin?
Right.
I mean, you can just imagine it.
Well,
can't
and
you?
all their wives and offspring, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like their
all their
whole
families.
family
Right.
is
yeah.
part of why they all came, I'm sure, to be able to get everything back to the rest of the family, which I'm sure was large at this point. I don't know how long it was from when Joseph was sold in slavery, but he was a youth. So now if you imagine he's 30 or 40, I don't know. You know, it could have been 15, 20, 30 years. I don't know. You know what I mean? But however long it was, you can imagine they've had kids by then, and they were all older than him, you know. And so,
Yeah, because I wouldn't.
except for Benjamin.
I wouldn't imagine it was 2 days that he was with Potiphar to gain all that
Right,
trust,
right,
and then he
right.
wasn't in prison for just a couple of days either, because they kind of forgot about him for a while,
Yes.
even after they were released. And then there was several years of famine that he was in charge before this happened. So
Yeah, I think it was 2 years of famine before
yeah,
they came.
so it would seem like you added up, you're talking at least a decade, if not
yeah,
two.
you'd think at least 10 to 15 years, or maybe
And think
20.
about, and what you said earlier too, Tim, about him knowing of their deceptive ways. Look, how would he have known that?
He
He had
experienced
17 years to learn that.
it.
Okay.
Yeah, he experienced it
Yeah.
firsthand.
Exactly.
Well, and remember, I think it was the week you taught, these are the brothers that tricked the whole city into murdering him. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
two of
Shechem.
them. Just
Yeah,
two
right.
of them. They tricked Shechem into
Yeah.
getting circumcised, and then they
Yeah.
went through and murdered every male in the city. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? So
yeah.
there's a little treachery here, right?
That's right.
This
I mean,
is
would you
not-
trust him? Oh,
I wouldn't have trusted him. No, he's trying to find out what their character's like now. And so after 3 days, Joseph said unto them, "This do and live, for I fear God." Now, shouldn't that have been a little bit of a clue? I fear God. How would a second to Pharaoh was a god
yeah, right.
in their society, how would
Just under Ra.
right. How would he be able to say he feared God if he was steeped in all the Egyptian practices?
Yeah, that was an interesting clue that was dropped there, wasn't it?
I think he's given them a little bit.
Yeah.
It says, "If we be true men, let our brethren be bound in the house of your prison. Go ye carry corn for the famine for your houses. But bring your youngest brother unto me, so your words may be verified, and ye shall not die." And they did so. And so he convinced them, like when they're going and talking to their father, they said he spoke roughly with them. When he says in verse 7, he knew them but made himself strange unto them and spake roughly unto them. We see this story is pretty congruent, right?
Yes.
So they go home. Well, the sons have remorse for Joseph, and they said one to another, "We are very guilty," in 21, verse 40, chapter 42, verse 21. "And they said one to another, We are very guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us." And so they're feeling guilt, remorse, shame,
PTSD.
whatever, yeah. They're stuck in that event to some degree. You know what I mean? They have not been able to progress spiritually, probably, or not as good as they could have, because they haven't resolved this wrong between them. "And Reuben answered them, saying, Spake I not unto you, saying, Do not sin against the child, and ye would not hear. Therefore, behold, also his blood is required. And they knew not that Joseph understood them, for he spake to them by an interpreter." And so this is another way that he made himself strange to them, right? He didn't. And so he turned himself about from them and wept. As you said, this is one of those examples. This was tugging at his heart. He wanted to divulge who he was, but he was going to find out how they were. Ellen G. White says that he wanted to check on, had they hurt his father or his younger brother,
yes.
because they were, the infirmed or the weak in this situation. Had his older brothers taken care of them, or had they done to them as they had done to him? And he was determined to find that out.
He knew what connivers they could be, and needed to know whether things had changed.
Yes. And so here we see his character in 25, and then Joseph commanded to fill their sacks with corn and to restore every man's money into his sack and give them provision for the way. And thus he did unto them. And we get down to 28, and one of his brothers is giving sustenance to one of the donkeys or whatever they have, and he opens his sack and realizes, oh, the money's there. And he says, my money is restored, and lo, it is even in my sack. And their heart failed them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, what is this that God hath done unto us? And so their idea of who God is a punishing God. You know what I mean? Like, they have a wrong conception of God here. Joseph has a very right conception of God. He's not trying to harm them. He's testing them to learn to define their character and how they're going to react in this. But we know that character, stress reveals an underlying character, right? Stress or situational stress reveals what's there. It doesn't make us have a suddenly new character. It reveals what's already there. And that's all he's trying to do. He's trying to put them in these odd situations where they're stressed, they're out of control, and he wants to see how they react. So with Joseph, when they all get home, and it came to pass as they emptied their sacks in verse 35, that behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack, and both they and their father saw the bundles of money, and they were afraid. And so they were really anxious about this. And so Jacob their father said to them, ye have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is not, Simeon is not, and you will take Benjamin away. All these things are against me. And so Reuben says, well, you can kill my two sons if something happens to them. And then later, before they go back, Judah stands in the gap in chapter 43, verse 8. And Judah said unto Israel his father, send the lad with me, we will arise and go, and we may live and not die, both we, thou, and also our little ones. I will be surety for him, by my hand shalt thou require him. If I bring him not unto thee, and set him before thee, then let me bear the blame forever. For except we had lingered, surely now we had returned this second time. In other words, if you would have let us have him, we would have already gone back and gotten more food. And Jacob said, and their father Israel said unto them, it must be so now, do this, take the best fruits. And he gives presents. And so we see the father has biblical principles, right? Mm-hmm. He's taking a gift. He's sharing a gift. He's trying to foster goodwill. And so Jacob entertains his brothers again, and the men took that present. They took double money in their hand. He doubled their money, so the money they brought back with them for buying the grain the first time, and another stack of money he took back to them. And with Benjamin, and rose up and went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. And when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the ruler of his house, bring these men home, slay and make ready, for these men shall dine with me at noon. And the men did as Joseph bade, and the men brought the men into Joseph's house. Joseph's brother, it says, the men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house, and they said, because of the money that was returned in our sacks at the first time we are brought in, that he may seek occasion against us and fall upon us and take us for bondmen and our donkeys. Here's the key. What type of character are they projecting on to Joseph?
The same character that they think is God's.
And the same character that they demonstrated to Shechem.
Yes, yes.
That's what they're projecting onto Joseph. That's what they're projecting onto God.
Well, and with that idea, they've been living in fear all these years that what they did is going to come back to get them later in some form. They didn't know what form that would be.
So would that be considered a restful
well,
existence?
No, I think they were miserable.
Miserable.
I think they were too.
Yeah.
I think that you can see that in here because this has been a decade or two possibly, and it's still very forefront in all of their minds. Sure. Right? They're all talking about it in the gaps here. They're worried about that other foot that's going to fall.
And then of course there's the next worry that comes is we've been lying to Dad for 10 years.
Yeah, that's right. And isn't it interesting? Reuben. Now look what, and this is going back to 42 verse 37. And Reuben spake unto his father. Now Reuben saw something in Joseph here. This is telling. He trusted him. He must have exuded some sort of trust here, because he said, "Look, if I don't bring him back to you, you can slay 2 of my kids, 2 of my sons." Right.
Right.
And he said, "I'll deliver them."
Well, Reuben advocated for Joseph
in the first place.
at the first place,
Yes.
right? He was the one
Yes.
said, "Oh, don't kill him, throw him in the pit."
Yeah.
And he intended on coming back and whisking him out of the pit and getting him back to Dad. So
That's right.
you can see that he didn't want to harm Joseph. He didn't want to get rid of Joseph. He had good intentions. But a boss I used to work with, his wife always told him, I love Doug, he was a great guy, and she would say, the road to hell, Doug, is paved with good intentions.
My dad used to tell me that.
Yeah. And so we can have the best intentions, but if we don't have the actions that go with it, it doesn't help. And it didn't help Joseph in that situation, even though he had a plan, Reuben had a plan, it didn't get to come to fruition.
Yeah.
So when they get back in, they come near to the steward, they're talking to him and saying, look, we've found our money. Oh, sir, we came indeed down at the first time to buy food. This is 43 verse 20. And it came to pass, when we came to the inn, we opened our sacks and beheld every man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight, and we have brought it again in our hand. And other money have we brought down in our hands to buy food. We cannot tell who put our money in our sacks. And he said, peace be to you, fear not, your God and the God of your father hath given you treasure in your sacks.
No.
I had your money. And he brought Simon out unto them. Sorry, go ahead.
Now, wasn't this the steward?
The steward,
This was the steward of Joseph's house.
who
Notice,
is not Israelite,
yeah, notice what he had been taught by Joseph
which
here.
was, fear not your God.
Yes, exactly. Notice
Yeah.
what he had been taught.
Yeah.
Your God has given you this, right?
But,
Yeah.
you know, backing way up, Joseph had these dreams that this was going to happen. He didn't know exactly how. Way before.
Oh, yeah.
What this is pointing out, and I think Joseph saw this, God basically said, Satan is going to attack you here, 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 through his brothers, through Potiphar, through his wife, he didn't give him he didn't lay out all the steps that Satan would attack. But what he said was, basically, you're going to be attacked by Satan, but I'm going to turn it for good.
Right.
That was the essence of the dream, was it not? He didn't realize it,
Right.
I don't think, until this point.
Sure.
Because it said the dreams all came back vividly to him.
Sure.
God revealed this was the plan
All along.
all
yeah.
along. It wasn't planned. I didn't cause these things to happen, but I
Orchestrated,
overrode
yes.
the attacks of Satan,
Sure.
and he basically has no power over you as
Right.
long as as long as you stay with me.
Yes. And so if we keep going into 24, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house, gave them water, washed their feet, gave their donkeys provender, and they made ready the present against Joseph came at noon, for they heard that they should eat bread there. I don't have any, thank you. And so they brought Dad's present and were getting it to him. And Joseph came home. They brought him the present which was in their hand into the house and bowed themselves to him on the earth. And he asked about their welfare. Is your father well, the old man whom you spake? Is he yet alive? And they answered, thy servant our father is in good health. He is yet alive. And they bowed down their heads and made obeisance. And he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, is this your younger brother of whom you spake unto me? And he said, God be gracious unto thee, my son. Now, would that not be another clue? God be gracious unto thee, my son. Right? This is a raw worshiper in their mind, and yet he's giving them clues.
But the setting didn't match anything possible.
I know.
And I think that's where we get blinded by certain settings can make it seem that things are impossible, And we may even think that there are people in high places that God cannot touch, or they've rejected him. That's not necessarily true. We don't know,
Right.
how God's interacting with anyone that is in any position in life. And we can't assume one way or the other.
But you have to think that when Joseph saw them bow to him, that the dream came back. I mean, it's not recorded here, but boy, you got
Yeah, I'm sure it came back the first time when he saw him, so I'm
Yeah,
sure he
right,
was
yeah.
still there. You know what I mean?
again, yeah, right.
And verse 30 it said, "And Joseph made haste, for his bowels did yearn upon his brother, and he sought where to weep, and he entered into his chamber and wept there." And so in this time frame, they felt like the emotions were seated in the bowels, and so that's why it says that. It
Right.
wasn't that he
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
he didn't have diarrhea, he didn't have constipation. It was about his emotions.
That's right.
But I think the brothers interpreted that he was angry with them.
Could be.
Yeah.
Because
31.
they get afraid later again, of course, as we get into the story.
In 31, he washed his face and went out and refrained himself and said, "Set on bread." And they set on for him by himself, and for them by themselves, and for the Egyptians by themselves, because it would defile the Egyptians to eat with the Jews in the Egyptians' mind. So they kind of had Joseph here, brothers over here, Egyptians over here. And they sat before him the firstborn according to his birthright, and to the youngest according to his youth. And the men marveled. What's so marvelous about that? He put them in order,
In order.
Yeah.
That's
by
right.
their birth.
Yeah.
You know what I
knew.
mean?
Yeah, of course.
And so they were all in order. And then he took and sent messes, plates, I don't know, food,
Yeah.
groups of food
Yeah.
to them. But Benjamin's mess was 5 times as much as any of theirs. And you got to catch this. And they drank and were merry with him. So this is a revelation of their character for their younger brother.
Sure.
They were able to drink and be merry with him.
Even though he got 5 times more.
5 times more. We don't see that envious
Yeah, that
stuff.
same spirit
Right.
still prevalent. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And Ellen G. White says in Patriarchs and Prophets 2:28, "Joseph sent messes unto them before him, but Benjamin was 5 times as much as any of his brothers. By this token of favor to Benjamin, Joseph hoped to ascertain if the youngest brother was regarded with the envy and hatred that had been manifested toward himself."
Yeah.
And it was not. And so we go through all of this, and basically they have the meal. They're exalted at Joseph's house, and then they're getting the grain, and then they're loading up to go. And what Joseph has his steward do is put his silver cup in Benjamin's bag with, I believe, all their monies again.
That's correct.
And so, anyway, he lets them leave, and they're like, yay, this was way more positive than the first time.
Yeah.
One of us had to stay in jail before,
Uh-huh.
and we're all leaving. And then they hear the steward's horse feet or whatever he was riding. And he overtook them, and he spake unto them. This is 44 verse 6. And he said exactly what Joseph told him to say. "Wherefore saith my Lord these words, God forbid that thy servant should do according to this thing. Behold, the money which we found in our sacks' mouths we brought again unto thee out of the hand of Canaan. How then should we steal out of the Lord's house silver or gold? From whomsoever of thy servants it be found, let him die, and we also shall be thy Lord's bondmen. So whoever stole the silver cup, let him die, and the rest of us will be your slaves."
Yeah.
And he said, the steward, "Now also let it be according unto your words. He that in whom is found shall be my servant, and ye shall be blameless." So the rest of them would get to go free. They speedily took down every man his sack to the ground, and opened every man his sack. And he searched, the steward searched, and began at the eldest and left at the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. So can you imagine they're kind of like, man, it's not there, it's not there, it's not there, it's not there. We got this, and the last sack, there it is. And so they rent their clothes and laded every man his donkey and returned to the city. Now that's a key. Why do you think they rent their clothes?
Well, it was a mark of
Distress or anguish?
yeah,
Sorrow?
Yeah, sorrow. Yes.
Why were they sorrowful?
They promised to bring Benjamin back.
Yes.
They were worried they weren't going to be able to bring Benjamin back to their father.
Right.
Now, this is a total diametrical shift when they sold Joseph into slavery to how they are reacting to Benjamin.
Yes.
Absolutely opposite.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny too. They searched every sack, every single one first, because they knew which one it was in,
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
to make it look like they didn't know where it was in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
You
the
know?
interesting thing, he gives a clue, like he puts them in birth order, and then he searches them by birth order. You know what I mean? So
Right.
there's a little clue there, but anyway, it's just wild. And
Yes.
so Joseph and his brethren came to Joseph's house, where he was yet there, and they fell before him on the ground. Joseph said, "What deed is this you have done? Would ye not that such a man as I can certainly divine? Can't you tell that I could tell what you did?"
Yeah. Right.
And Judah said, "What shall we say unto my Lord? What shall we speak?" And notice who's up front here. This is Judah who
Judah.
said, "Sell him."
Yeah.
And I suspect Joseph heard him say, "Sell him." You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
What shall we say unto my Lord? What shall we speak? And this is one of the most beautiful speeches in the Bible. It's a very beautiful speech. How shall we clear ourselves? God hath found out the iniquity of thy servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also, with whom the cup is found. And he said, God forbid that I should do so, but the man in whose hand the cup is found, he shall be my servant. And as for you, get up in peace unto your father. Then Judah came near unto him and said, O my Lord, let thy servant, I pray thee, speak a word in thy Lord's ear, and let not thine anger burn against thy servant, for thou art even as Pharaoh. And he said unto my Lord, We have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, a little one, and his brother is dead, and he is alone is left of his mother, and his father loveth him. And thou saidst unto thy servants, Bring him down unto me, that I may set my eyes upon him. And we said unto my Lord, The lad cannot leave his father, for he should leave his father should die. And thou saidst unto thy servants, Except your youngest brother come down with you, ye shall see my face no more. And it came to pass, when we came up unto thy servant my father, we told him the words of my Lord. And our father said, Go again and buy us a little food. And we said, We cannot go down. If our younger brother be with us, then we will go down. For we may not see this man's face, except our younger brother be with us. And thy servant my father said unto us, Ye know that my wife bare me 2 sons, and the one went out from me. And I said, Surely he is torn in pieces, and saw him not since. And if we take this also from me, and mischief fall upon him, we shall bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. And therefore, when I come to thy servant my father, and the lad be not with us, seeing that his life is bound up in the lad's life, it shall come to pass, when he seeth the lad is not with us, he will die, and thy servants will bring down the gray hairs of thy servant our father with sorrow to the grave. For thy servant became surety for the lad unto my father, saying, If I bring him not unto thee, then I shall bear the blame to my father forever. Now therefore I pray thee, let thy servant abide instead of the lad, a bondman to my Lord, and let the lad go up with his brethren. And how shall I go to my father, and the lad be not with me? Lest peradventure I see the evil that shall come on my father. And so this is a type of Christ. Judah is being a type of Christ now, right? He's surety for the lad.
Yeah.
The lad had sinned, and not really, but it looked as if he was guilty of this, right?
Yeah.
And so by any court in the law, he was going to be convicted. And yet Judah is standing in, whereas Judah is the one that said, Sell Joseph. And so it's a total diametric shift in where he was originally at years ago. when we go to 45, then Joseph cannot refrain himself before all them that stood by him. He made all of his people leave, and then he was with his brothers and said, I am your brother, and cried with them and wept with them. And then we see where he set them up with everything they needed to bring their whole family. Pharaoh was promised them the best part of Egypt, and they did have the best part of Egypt. Goshen is the most fertile land there, they say. And they were able to come together, but the key with this is Joseph forgave his brothers, and he was able to be blessed by God. If we hold on to victimology, we're limiting, it's harming us. It harms us more than it harms the person we're mad at. Somewhere in here, I think it said, I don't remember if it was in the teachers or in the actual lesson, it talks about how being angry with somebody is like drinking poison and expecting it to harm the person. Okay?
The other person, yeah.
So it's not going to harm them. It only harms us. And so that's our flawed thinking with it. Having revenge or whatever only harms us and not the other individual.
I mean, you notice in this story, as good as this is, it seems to be partially born on guilt, because he's not talking about his brother's well-being of being a slave. He's talking about basically, I've already caused my father pain.
Yes.
Yeah.
With the first son, I can't bear the pain it will cause my father if this happens again.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's a tremendous amount of guilt for what he did both to his father and what he would do
Yes.
again.
Yes.
That he's trying to absolve by doing this. So yeah, it is he's trying to stand in for it, but like I said, I don't see him talking about, Benjamin and how, I don't want Benjamin to be a slave at all. So I think that in a way this did touch Joseph's heart, because basically he could see his brother has had a lot of suffering in his heart for years also.
Sure.
And it's being revealed in his
Right.
actions.
And so one of my favorite grief individuals that talks about grief, he was in Oklahoma City. Evidently, I'm not going to remember any name today.
Some days are like that, Tim.
I know, evidently. He was a sculptor. He was a Baptist minister. He was a sculptor, but he became a hospice grief coordinator. And then when the Oklahoma City bombing came about, he got immersed solely in grief in the community. And he's respected across the United States for his grief and the insight into it. And he says, like, when we see Joseph and his brothers mourning, they were so loud that Pharaoh heard them in his house. Okay? And so when we're seeing this, my buddy, which name I can't remember, said that mourning is grief gone public. And God can bless that, because he says on the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are those that mourn. But he says grief we internalize and we don't make public. It doesn't have to be grossly public, but we have to share it. But if we hold grief inside and don't allow it outside, it doesn't go public as mourning, then we're not coping with it well. We're internalizing it. We can't be as blessed as when we allow grief to go public. And he could go through text after text after text and illustrate why that is. And I cannot, but it was just a really insightful study when he did that.
On another note, I think when they gave Benjamin 5 times the food of the others, I think maybe the others had very small portions. In other words, not enough to fill themselves. He had 5 times as much. He had plenty.
Right.
And because if you had enough and the other one had a lot more, you wouldn't necessarily draw the idea of envy or jealousy. But if I got this little tiny amount and he got a big bowl, that might make me a little irritated. And I think
Sure.
that was the intent that he was trying
he was
to pull out of
testing
them. And it says they didn't act that way.
Yeah.
So it doesn't say that specifically, so maybe I'm reaching in it, but I think that may have been kind of the scenario, that He got 5 times as much, which was plenty.
Right.
They didn't get plenty.
We might expect that beginning in chapter 45 here, when Joseph made himself known to his brethren, that he lost the interpreter,
Yes.
spoke their native language. Yeah?
He told them to go. That was one of the men. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he definitely lost his interpreter. So I want to take us to what I think is the most important aspect of this, and we're going to go to Matthew, and I've kind of jumped around, but I just wanted to follow the biblical narrative. If we go to Matthew 25:41, and this is where Christ is talking. It's a red letter in my Bible. It says, "Then shall he say unto them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, unto everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungered, and ye gave me no meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me not in. Naked, and ye clothed me not. Sick and in prison, and ye visited me not. Then shall they also answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee in hunger or athirst, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister unto thee? Then shall he answer them, saying, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye did it not unto one of the least of these, ye did it not to me." And so Christ so identifies himself with those in need that if we don't help the person in need, it's like we're not helping Christ. It's like we're ignoring Christ. And so we can have every theological theory memorized, everything known, but if it's a form and it doesn't actuate us to help others, we're in a bad spot. Our theories are not going to save us. It's our theories that stimulate a love response from us that will demonstrate his character to others and help us make sure we're in the right spot with God. And so he says in 46, "And they shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous unto life eternal." And so he so identifies with those in need. If we ignore those in need, it's like we're ignoring God himself. And so that's a very different image of the character than what Joseph's brothers had of God. You know what I mean?
But I think another aspect of that is important. We can't go out and do those things because we think they're right to do. Because the other side, when he says, you've done all these things, they say, when did we do them? They didn't realize.
Yes. That's what I said. If
When
it's
it's coming
stimulated
from
by
the heart,
love,
when it's
yeah.
coming from the heart, the Spirit's prompting you, and you have no intentionality
Right.
in your actions. You are
You're
just
just the
following
response.
the
Yep.
response. When we focus on the intentionality, say, I better do this because it's, I better give them clothes, I better go visit the prisoner, I better do this because God tells me to. I think we're
That's a
doing that for the
form.
wrong reason too.
Yeah, that's a form and a
that's a
function.
form, and we don't know him any better.
So I want to read the last quote in the lesson. "Nothing can justify an unforgiving spirit. He who is merciful toward others shows that he himself is not a partaker. He who is unmerciful toward others shows that he himself is not a partaker of God's pardoning grace. In God's forgiveness, the heart of the erring one is drawn close to the great heart of infinite love. The tide of divine compassion flows into the sinner's soul and from him to the souls of others. The tenderness and mercy that Christ has revealed in his own precious life will be seen in those who become sharers of his grace." And so we talk about the vine and having to be plugged into the vine. This is what God is talking about. He wants us to be sharers of his grace, and it will flow naturally from us to the other, not from a motivation of I've got to do right, from a natural reflex that this is what God would expect me to do. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, sometimes when you're hurt and you want to hurt others. So when we forgive because God has forgiven us, you are free. You have
Yes.
that choice, and it's a decision that you have to make. We have a forgiving spirit. And one time, a former member here, she left now, but they left church because they said so much bickering and all that stuff.
Right.
extend that grace.
Yeah, we're called to forgive as He forgave us, yes. And it's like if we're holding on to unforgiveness, it harms us much more than it harms the person we're angry at. All right, well, let's bow our head and have prayer. Thank you, everybody, for your contribution. Dear Father, thank you for Sabbath. Thank you for your word, the ability to share it. We know at some point that will be impinged upon, and we won't be able to gather in groups like this. Please help us to take full advantage of it while it's available. Help us to love you. Help us to always focus on having a living, breathing relationship with you so that it will flow to others naturally from us. In Jesus' name, amen.